Hi guys, Jared here with Day Traders FX. It's time for the daily video update. We've got a couple of really good setups to talk about and some news announcements in the works, so let's get right into it. Quickly, you can see the U.S. markets have had a pretty good day. Oil is up at I believe, looks like a 14-month high actually. Gold's up a good little chunk. Dow and S&P are both having some pretty bullish days. So we're seeing we're seeing the risk buying definitely coming back into the market. The question is, how is that going to play out on U.S. dollar pairs? We're going to look at that in just a moment. We have a little bit of a news left today. Trade balance out of China. And the Westpac Consumer Sentiment Report out of Australia. Trade balance should be a pretty big mover again for Aussie pairs as well later today, so just keep an eye on that. But coming into tomorrow is where things get pretty exciting and pretty big. We have the FOMC meeting minutes tomorrow. Bernanke will be speaking as well a little bit after that. That's going to be some pretty high volatility movement tomorrow, so we can kind of just count on that being a pretty big day, probably a pretty crazy day, and you know, just we'll look at the levels and kind of see how those play in. Excuse me. And then remember, we have employment change and or the employment rates for Australia coming out tomorrow as well. So pretty big stuff, some pretty good news announcements. Let's just keep our eyes open for all of that. The euro dollar has made some pretty interesting movements. We did see the euro dollar make a little bit of a pullback here at the start of the week, bounce off this low, and it's broken some trend lines and made some new multi-month lows anyways. We've also got this missed daily pivot that's kind of hanging over our head, and I just have to wonder a couple of things. Number one, missed pivot up here at 129.30, pretty important setup. What will that mean for, you know, some further continuation down? Number two, the euro dollar has just hit, remember, our low of all of 2013 is 127.40. 44.45 right there. We just had a low of 127.50. Well, let's get some exact numbers on this one. Low 127.55. So we came 10 pips of the low of the entire year, and it seems to be bouncing pretty well. Now we do have a pretty strong bearish engulfing candle right here, but when we start talking about yearly lows, especially when we're talking about summer trading, it's something that I have to wonder if, you know, if there's going to be maybe a slightly larger reaction off of this low than we might expect. We've broken some pretty nice levels. We're staying in this channel, but this is a good time for this to kind of retrace and especially come back up to that missed daily pivot, especially with Fed news coming out tomorrow. We'll get a little bit more clarity on the tapering and some of those details, and that could really that could really cause an easy rally, and that could be a great opportunity. Number one, to short the euro dollar a bit higher, maybe up in the 130 area, but to take out this daily pivot point. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. I think the euro dollar is still very, very bearish, but with the news tomorrow, I would not be surprised to see it run up and take out some of these upper targets before continuing down, especially since it's, you know, we've seen some pretty good price rejection off of that 127.50 low. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on with this euro dollar. So for the moment, you can look for opportunities to short against this 12800 if it stays below 12800 and test that. That might be a good little area to take a bounce and just short this just a little bit. We're going to have some missed pivots coming out that'll be up here a little ways, but there's going to be a couple of opportunities on this euro dollar to probably continue shorting, but I'm going to be really cautious and curious about this breaking 127.50 before the Fed news tomorrow, and honestly that Fed news could really drive the euro up a bit and give us some opportunities to short at these higher from these higher levels. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Pound dollar has continued to see some pretty good weakness. Now we had this run right here. We actually made it above the weekly pivot just slightly on this retracement, above the 23% fib, all of that, and then down it comes again and makes just a slightly newer low, not by a whole lot. So our low from Friday to the low today was about 40 or 45 pips, so there's definitely some in there. But I'm looking for the pound dollar to start a bit of a retracement and start working its way back up. You can see that we've broken out of this channel, and the channel is probably safely expanded now. We got up above this. We had a nice little shooting star on that 4-hour chart, excuse me, and then it starts coming back down. But now we're getting a nice bounce off of the low. Once again, here we are with the pound dollar hitting the yearly lows as well. So euro dollar came within 10 pips of the yearly lows, and the pound dollar actually exceeded the yearly lows by just a couple of pips. But when we're talking about a daily chart, to see, give or take a few pips on these extreme highs and lows on these larger time frames is not uncommon. So our low here was 148.12, and I believe our low back here is about 148.30. 30 something. It looks like about 148.30. So we pushed past it by about 18 pips, but pretty big price rejection. You can see that we're getting a pretty good bounce off that low, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some retracement starting to happen on this pound dollar as well. It's going to be interesting to see exactly where those entries might be able to happen. Again, with the Fed news, I'm looking for the pound to probably start moving higher and to start pushing into some of these upper areas. Remember, we have a missed daily pivot back here, which is 141.15, excuse me, 151.15, which is now a good little chunk away, about 250 pips or so away. And I think that is a very real target for FOMC news tomorrow, and could also be a good opportunity for us to short at some of these higher levels. So I'm kind of holding off on the pound dollar for the moment. I won't do anything until the Fed news comes out, and we're going to wait and see how this works. But remember, the important thing to remember is that euro dollar and pound dollar both are bouncing off of yearly lows, and we're a little bit into the year now. We're 7 months into the year, and so to hit those lows is pretty significant. It's one thing when you hear we're at yearly lows and it's January, but when we're in July, those are going to be some pretty significant levels. And remember, summer trading is slightly lower volume, and so the chance of breaking those lows sooner than later is a little bit less than it might be otherwise during bigger trending times of the year. So, but I think they will break. I just think we're probably going to see a bit of a bounce off those levels sooner than later. The Aussie dollar is just bouncing around here. I've been talking about the Aussie dollar a little bit, and there's just not a ton I want to do with this one. Surprisingly, it's actually setting up pretty well. The Aussie dollar has bottomed out pretty nicely here at about 90.35. And you can see that we've had these big moves down, and it looks like on the weekly chart we may be able to end up with a semi-bullish engulfing candle, and it's a pretty nice little move there. This trend line right here, you can see a pretty nice breakout, and it looks like the Aussie might be ready to make some bigger movements. And I think trading against some of these levels, we're now 150 pips off the low, but we're about 65 pips out of the breakout area. And I think that this Aussie might be a good opportunity to start looking for longs and entries, against the yearly lows and against this breakout area. But I don't have an entry just yet, and I'll probably hold off just a bit longer before I do much there. But just kind of remember that. And speaking of Aussie pairs, the Aussie yen is doing something pretty interesting. It's come up against the 23% fib, the 200 moving average, the top of a channel, R1. A lot of things right there are leading us to believe that there may be some bounce off of that and a little bit of pullback on that Aussie yen back down to towards the bottom of the channel or near it. A little short-term trend line to watch will be looking at this and seeing if if this upper resistance area, which there is quite a bit of resistance, if that can hold and we can get a break of this trend line, then we may get a nice little run at least towards the lower part of the channel. It may not perfectly touch it, but if we can get back down to kind of that mid area that the Aussie yen's kind of been bouncing around, that could be a great short against those highs. So just keep that in mind. Euro yen, this is one level that I've talked about quite a bit, and it's the 128.50-60 area. And the euro yen has tested this a couple of times, and it's right back to it. So it seems to be holding in this channel pretty well, and I actually like getting long against these lows. I think there's good opportunities there. We're about 50 pips off of that. Looks like we're going to end with a pretty bullish reversal candle on this 4-hour chart, and I think the euro yen might be a good opportunity to get long against that area. So let's be watching for that and looking for opportunities to get long there against 128.60 and ultimately about 57 against these lows. So let's just say 128.50, which we're a little bit off, but I think there's some opportunities to buy on some dips there. So I'm going to be watching that on the euro yen. And the pound yen's been kind of choppy and kind of all over the place, and there's really nothing too much to mention about this. It has broken out of our kind of shorter term channel right here, and it's been consolidating under it and continuing to push lower. But I still think the pound yen's a little choppy for my taste. There's probably some entries to be had in there, but I'm not going to be looking at too much just yet. I will be looking to buy on the dip on the euro yen, sell this rally on the Aussie yen, potentially buy on the dip on the Aussie dollar. Ultimately looking to probably get long against the yearly lows on the pound dollar, and even potentially get long on the against the yearly lows on the euro dollar as well. So we'll be looking at all of these opportunities, and I'll have more details coming out on Twitter as well as in the chat. We'll see you guys there. Thanks for watching.